we've got someone with us this morning, very interesting. We'll see where the conversation leads. But Dr. Michael Newsome is with us this morning. He is 18 years at Marshall as a professor and some time in Lexington at the University of Kentucky. And you're now at...
I'm at the South Carolina Governor's School for Science and Mathematics.
And we've got him here because there's been a lot of conversation about the relationship the United States has with China. And Trumpism, for lack of a better word, has been not so diplomatic in his dealing with foreign countries. Europe, he deals with a certain way. NAFTA, we heard some of the reworking of NAFTA yesterday. Napoleon Bonaparte, if I'm not mistaken, I don't know much about China, but I did see the movie over the weekend, Crazy Rich Asians. So maybe that suggests that my intellectual curiosity is more than I'm given credit for. But I wrote a quote that I remember Napoleon getting credit for. This quote has been attributed to Napoleon. I don't know if he said it or not, but he said, "China, there lies a sleeping giant. Let him sleep, for when he wakes, he will move the world." From your perspective, was Napoleon right? And exactly what was he implying when he made that comment somewhere in the early 1800s?
You know, it's interesting you mentioned the movie, the Crazy Rich Asians. One of the things that you'll notice is China right now, and I just checked this yesterday on the Economic Intelligence Unit, is wealthier than the United States in overall numbers. So if you're looking at purchase power parity, they're a bigger economy than we are. You know, when you start looking at per person, because they're much bigger than us, it's quite different. I think we're making about $59,500 per person in this country. And in China, it's around $16,000 or so. So you think that's about, what, 4.5 times smaller? Mm-hmm. So the typical Chinese is going to be smaller than in wealth than the typical American. However, a lot of that wealth is concentrated in Shanghai and in Beijing. And that's where you're getting the crazy rich Asian effector in some of those urban areas. Now, getting back to Napoleon, I think what we're saying is as they get wealthier, they are going to start impacting the world. You see that everywhere. You go to Europe, go to Paris, go to any of those shops. You know, you want to buy a handbag. Almost everybody there is going to be a Chinese consumer. So I don't know if Napoleon at the time was talking about economics. I think it was more military and political. However, I think we're seeing that economic impact everywhere right now.
Dr. Newsome, this is a weird question, but I hope you understand where I mean, having 1.4 billion people or whatever the number is now, I mean, it obviously changes year after year, census after census, but the sheer number of people in China, is that net negative or net positive? You talked about the economic influence that number of people could have once they become affluent or a certain percentage becomes affluent. But is it problematic for China to have such a large population, or is it to their advantage? Or is that a weird question?
You know, it goes both ways. I think this has always been China. Historically, this has been China's difficulty, right? It's a huge country. The land mass is the same as that of the United States. And if you look at China, you've got the northeastern region around Harbin and that area, Heilongjiang area. And that's almost looks like Russia. You've got very cold. They have ice castle festivals. You go over into the northwest. You've got Xinjiang. You've got the Uyghur population, Muslim population that China sometimes has difficulties with. You go down into the southwest part of China. You've got Tibet, Xizan area. And then in the southeast, you've got a lot of what were traditionally almost independent kingdoms that then just gave tribute back to Beijing. And I've traveled in many of these areas. And I think for Beijing, it's been very difficult to keep this country together. And so from that perspective, I think that's something that China has always struggled with. And it's one of the reasons why the current president is maybe clamping down a little bit more, is just a little bit afraid that things might be getting out of control. So from that perspective, I think it's been a negative for China. But of course, it can't hurt to always have a large population to throw at a problem as well.
Okay, when we talk about our form of government, some people mistake it for a democracy. It's a representative republic. We elect people to go to Washington to represent the unique interest of a certain district or certain state. When we look at China, from your perspective, someone who has dealt with and understands that at a much greater level than the majority of our listeners, explain China's government in a lay fashion to the average American.
You know, I've traveled a lot to China with different students. So I would go with executive MBA students, college kids, and now high school kids. I just got back this summer with 5 kids from the governor's school who were doing some research with the College of Charleston on intellectual property right violations. And one of the things that I always find fascinating when I go there is the typical American, when they go into the country, they're shocked because we have this perception that you're going to have soldiers on every corner with guns, keeping everybody in control. That's not at all the way it is. When you go there, if you're not very political, if you're not really looking for it, you'd say this is a very open society. You can go shopping, you can buy stuff, you can go to nightclubs, whatever you want to do. It looks like just a typical Western society. But there's something underneath all of this, and that is the central government wants to make sure that they are not going to be bothered. So as long as you do not say anything about the central government, as long as you let the political elite keep their power, you can do pretty much anything you want. So it's a little bit different, I think, than most people think about China. You've got a powerful elite who say they are in Beijing. They want to make sure that they keep their power. Other than that, go out, get rich, start companies. You know, that tends to be the.
How in the world can you manage the uniqueness of that? In other words, how can you have a Starbucks on every corner and Asians wearing polo shirts, and underneath that exists a communist government? How in the world can you square that up? How can you hope to hang on to that in the long term?
Well, it's not really a communist government.
Okay.
It's communist in name only. So it's really just another way of controlling power. It's another way of controlling the population. So it is like an oligarchy or a small group of people who are able to maintain control in
Sounds like
Beijing.
America. Okay, having said that, Trump, we mentioned the not so diplomatic way this president deals with foreign countries. Is Trump on to something when he argues that China's a bad actor as it relates to trade and having America's? I mean, Trump ran for office and said, "I don't have any interest in being president of the world." But you do assume a responsibility around the world when you become the American president. But when Trump argues that China's a bad actor as it relates to trade, you would respond how?
Well, I wouldn't even use the word bad actor. I assume that everybody is out there trying to get the best for themselves. Every country wants to make sure that their population is doing well. So just putting it in economic terms, if every country were about the same size and every country were competing with each other, tariffs are going to be bad for everyone. If you put a tariff on a particular product, what's going to happen is going to hurt your own population as well. Now, if you are a big country, then you can use tariffs to your advantage. So you can use tariffs in order to get a better price for your own population. So if you're bigger than everybody else, yes, you can have some advantage through tariffs. But if all countries are about the same size, you're going to hurt the other guy, but you're also going to hurt yourself. So when you look at the United States and China, we're both big countries. We're about the same size. Now, if a country decides to put a tariff on another one, they can gain only if the other country allows them to. So what I think is happening is this is pretty much two actors who are both trying to gain something for themselves. I don't know if I would put it in bad or good terms, but yes, I think that we would be right in saying that China has been able to take some advantage of the economic system. Now, by putting tariffs into play, like the United States has recently, we're going to hurt ourselves. You definitely are going to hurt yourself by putting tariffs in play. That's just economic theory. But now you have the political level as well. Why would you do that? Well, you might put tariffs into play because you expect down the road we will force them to behave differently. So it's just a cost-benefit analysis. There's always the economic side, which is the theory, and we've got all the empirical evidence to say, hey, we put tariffs on things, we're going to be worse off. Should we do it? Now the politics comes into play. And different people are going to have different opinions. And so I'm an economist, so I can tell you the economic theory, but whoever is in charge of the politics, you know, the American people elect someone. So whoever is there is going to have an opinion about the cost-benefit analysis. And I think what Trump is hoping here is that by putting tariffs in, eventually we will be able to outweight China. We will be able to force them to then open up a little bit more and allow our goods in. Is that true or not? Who knows? But right now, Trump's the one, you know, making the call.
Well, I mean, I'm going to be I'm going to sound like a simpleton. I hope you know where I'm headed here. Does China need America more than America needs China, or vice versa?
You know, China still, and that's a very good question. I've read several recent articles on this in the Economist magazine, the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times. China still is dependent upon exports. So
and we're a big consumer.
Yes, and we are a big consumer. So, and that is exactly what Trump is hoping, is that they do need us more. However, if you look from a political perspective, and this is the other side that you do have to take into consideration, is China always takes a very long-term look at the world. And so would they be willing to maybe undergo some pressure, maybe undergo some worsening of their economy in order to outweigh the United States? I don't know. I mean, I can't predict the future, but that's the other side. Do they need us economically? Yes, more than we need them. There's no doubt. However, politically, do they have the will, or do they have someone in power who can force them to have the will to wait us out? See, it's just a game. If you're going to play this tariff game and it's going to be tit for tat, then it's a matter of who can just play the game the longest. China historically has had a very long political perspective on things.
Would you consider the U.S. and China to be geopolitical friends or foes, or is that an unfair question? Do you have to be one or the other?
I think we're both friend and foe in different situations. China has helped us out on a few occasions. They are now wanting to force their power, particularly into the South China Sea. So in China is starting to be more aggressive just in their region. And then on the other hand, they've helped us out. Sometimes even in North Korea, for example. I do think that this is politics, right? Sometimes they're your friends, sometimes they're your enemy.
Sure.
Right.
This has nothing to do with being an economist or geopolitically. What does China think of the average American? I mean, you've spent time in China. When you're there, I mean, obviously there's an underculture you're talking about, or an element that's not seen on every street corner, to use your analogy, a government that kind of controls what happens in the country. But from your perspective on Main Street China, I mean, how is America perceived? How are we viewed? I don't want to say friendly or foolishly, but is there a sentiment Chinese people or the Chinese nation has about Americans?
From my perspective, the individual Chinese consumer, or just let's just say person, really likes America. I think as Chinese get wealthier, you'll tend to see they send their kids to the United States. They'll put as many assets as they can get out of the country into China, into America, into Canada, into Australia. So they like America. Of course, there's going to be things that we do which aggravate them. They really do have a strong preference for not hearing anything about Taiwan not being Chinese. So I have learned the hard way on a couple of occasions to not talk about Taiwan being an independent country, just offhand. But, those are little things. I think almost and I've been going there, since I think 2005. I had a sabbatical in China. Everything I've heard from and everything that I've been able to pick up on shows that the Chinese like Americans. They like America.
Last question. Why is it important to the world for China and America to have some existing working relationship? Is it important to the world? And if it is, why is it important?
Yeah, it's going to be very important. I think that this is probably the biggest geopolitical question of the 21st century. And if we can find a working relationship, I think we can make the world population better off, both economically and in terms of just politics and militarily. So we do have to find some kind of understanding. And it's not going to be some ooey gooey, we love each other all the time relationship. This is real politics. But I do think it's possible. I do think the Chinese have a practical view. I think that in the end, we will be able to work this out. I'm fairly optimistic.
I was dishonest. I said that was the last question. I got one more. I just kind of brainstorming here while you're talking. I grew up in the Cold War. I mean, I can remember the Soviet Union being a superpower. I mean, they were an adversary of America. It was clear. Ronald Reagan, called them the evil. I mean, it was obvious that we were in the middle of a Cold War, a political confrontation with what a lot of Americans perceived to be the enemy. Is China a superpower? And if they are a superpower, are they a superpower that threatens American democracy?
Yes, they are a superpower. I do not think that they threaten American democracy in the same way that those of us who grew up in the Cold War, felt from Russia. The reason is it's not ideological. Between the Soviet Union and the United States, there were these ideological questions, and you really wanted to show that your political position was better than the other guys.
Really, your value system.
Yes,
is that fair?
That's absolutely correct. And that's not what's going on with China. China is interested in making its people better off, showing its power in the region so that it feels safe. This is someone you can work with. See, that's always the question is there some give and take here? Is there something that we have, we can give them, and they can give us? I think China is willing to do that give and take. With Russia, we were just trying to get rid of the other guy.
Well said. Thank you, my friend.